Before sunrise, an unpolished clip surges across timelines. A billionaire's 7-year-old, long defined by a chair's small wheels and larger whispers, rises and steps toward a lacquered piano. The frame jitters, the audio hisses, yet the image is undeniable. 2 trembling steps, one astonished gasp somewhere off camera, and then a fragile collapse into waiting arms. The internet crowns it miracle. The mansion calls it misconduct. In the gap between those verdicts, a war over truth begins. Boardrooms awaken, crisis phones blink, and public relations drafts careful denials. Far from the glass towers, a prepaid phone pings with a spent upload receipt. The moment belongs to no surgeon, no investor, no press release. It belongs to movement itself, defiant, imperfect, and public. By the time sunlight touches the lake outside the Harrington estate, the world knows before the father does. Days before the leak, Emily Carter entered the lakeside estate carrying more grit than luggage. Marble floors met frayed sneakers, crystal chandeliers judged a plain gray sweater, and framed philanthropy smiled with immaculate teeth. The hierarchy announced itself through polished surfaces and practiced glances. Mr. Grayson handed her a schedule like a verdict, lines of labor circled by caution. Rooms had names, wings had rules, and doors remembered who opened them. In that geography, Emily was mapped to corners, linens, windows, and silence. She noted the lake's stillness, the camera's small red eyes, and the staff's amusement curdling into sport. Somewhere upstairs, a child's wheelchair hummed softly, a lullaby of limit. Somewhere else, a grand piano waited like an altar to what used to be. Emily breathed, steadied her hands on the cart's handle, and pushed forward into a house that mistook order for justice.
The kitchen ran on heat, knives, and hierarchy. Marcus, sovereign of flame and plating, wielded a spatula like a gavel, stamping verdicts on worth through laughter. Around him, stainless steel reflected faces that grinned when money watched and smirked when it didn't. Emily took her place at the periphery, where newcomers learned the choreography of invisibility. Jokes arrived dressed as camaraderie, but carried the weight of eviction. Every chuckle taxed her dignity. Every glance tallied her distance from belonging. She kept her posture quiet, her motions precise, her breathing measured. Cutting boards thudded like small drums. A timer screamed. Somewhere above, glass chimed in wealth's softer register. Emily's silence refused the role written for her. When laughter sought purchase, it slid off a steadiness practiced through lean years, late buses, and longer hopes. In rooms like this, refusal rarely looks heroic. It looks like work continued. Cheryl Pratt curated the mansion's unofficial news, birthdays, missteps, minor rebellions, distilled, embellished, and redistributed with a smile honed for damage. She navigated corridors as if they were runways, each whisper a heel strike, each rumor another spin of the knife. In a house where money insulated the powerful, Cheryl's currency was proximity, traded for attention, traded again for influence. Emily's arrival offered fresh content: the shoes, the bag, the background, the presumed limits. Predictions multiplied, thoughtful as weather reports, cruel as evictions. There was profit in pessimism. There was status in knowing how stories end. Cheryl preferred tidy narratives where the poor exit quickly and the rich remain unruffled. She never noticed the quiet details that complicate certainty, the way a hand steadies a cart, the way an eye measures distance, the way breath slows before a necessary leap. Those details were already writing another ending.
Clara Harrington's room overlooked the lake's flawless surface, a mirror designed to flatter the shore. Inside, careful order replaced curiosity. Labeled drawers, measured routines, equipment aligned like arguments. Denise Rowe, armored in credentials and certainty, managed access the way a banker manages vaults. Clara's hands rested in her lap. small islands waiting for weather to change. Emily entered with a cloth, the posture of service, and a refusal to stare. She cataloged textures, the rubber grip of wheelchair handles, the cool varnish of toy blocks untouched, the faint indentations where tiny feet were taught not to try. The air carried lavender and authority. Denise monitored every inch, policing proximity, reducing risk until hope itself felt hazardous. Emily's work traced surfaces, yet her attention settled on breath, rhythm, and the child's gaze that flickered, briefly, toward the possibility of something unpermitted: play. In an empty hallway, a cleaning cloth slipped and fell, a minor accident in a mansion calibrated to prevent them. Emily pivoted instinctively, a neat arc born from years of drills in gymnasiums that never smelled like money. The turn was simple, the catch precise, the landing quiet. Cameras watched without understanding. Down the corridor, Clara saw everything. In that moment, Grace relocated from recital halls to maintenance floors, uninvited and entirely at home. Emily did not perform, she resumed. Yet the house, a collector of status performances, recognized unpurchased excellence and bristled. Small defiance rarely announces itself with speeches. It happens between tasks, beneath chandeliers, inside routines designed to keep lives predictable. A fall avoided, a balance kept, a skill repurposed. Clara's eyes widened, a tide pulling against the shoreline of resignation. Nothing else changed, not yet. But something small refused to stay small.
Staff meals echoed with practiced cruelty disguised as banter. The long tables solved hunger while feeding hierarchy. Jokes targeted whatever could not afford protection. Accents, neighborhoods, shoes that remembered other owners. Emily ate at the edge, a geography decision disguised as seating. Forks clinked, phones glowed. Laughter sought consensus and found it easily. She concentrated on portions and breathing, rituals learned when food was measured and futures were not. The room wanted reaction more than conversation. Silence, held correctly, refuses both. Across the table, Cheryl drafted tonight's storyline, efficient as a press office, adding flavors the facts never owned. Marcus let laughter fill the pans where steam should have. Mr. Grayson observed everything, awarding nothing. Upstairs, a child would be measured again tomorrow. Downstairs, Emily finished what was hers and returned the tray, choosing endurance over spectacle, momentum over permission. Laundry rooms collect what wealth discards: lint, secrets, and the hum of unseen labor. Alone among washers, Emily touched a soft-edged photograph tucked deep in her pocket. A smaller version of herself hung upside down in midair, body taut, eyes certain, a world inverted yet aligned. The picture held not nostalgia, but evidence. Balance learned before life tipped. Control practiced when circumstances refused it. The gym that trained her had closed when funding fled communities wealth rarely visits. Coaches moved on, mats frayed, trophies gathered dust and storage units paid late. Yet muscle remembers. And so does resolve. The photo returned to fabric, its edges pressing into the cloth like a promise. Outside the door, the estate's cycles continued. Press, polish, present, preparing rooms for people who mistook immaculate for moral. Emily lifted the next stack, folded corners precisely, and prepared to meet another staircase.
In the glass-walled garden room, sunlight arranged itself into possibilities. Emily rolled a small rubber ball beneath her sneaker, then balanced it lightly, a quiet invitation disguised as mischief. No commands, no proclamations, just the suggestion that bodies sometimes answer better to curiosity than compliance. Clara watched, and the watching changed into wanting. A foot shifted, uncertain but alive. A toe lifted, a shin trembled, a breath caught. Denise's protocols insisted progress must be documented, authorized, billable. Emily honored a different ledger that counted sparks. The ball dropped, bounced twice, settled. Nothing earth-shaking happened, and everything did. In that tiny arc, a child met her own body, without an audience of experts deciding the outcome first. The room, used to ornamental plants and ornamental hope, witnessed a new growth pattern. Across the estate, clocks measured salary. Here, seconds measured strength returning quietly to its owner. Maxwell Harrington occupied rooms like a verdict, footsteps announcing a lifetime of yeses delivered on schedule. He prized outcomes purchasable, processes reportable, and problems delegable. In the library, shelves displayed bound confidence. Windows performed serenity for anyone needing to believe in merit's reflection. He saw Emily near his daughter's corner of toys and therapies, and the house's assumptions arranged themselves behind his eyes. Wealth often mistakes caution for wisdom, control for care. He objected to hope measured in inches rather than invoices, preferring certainties that came with consultants attached. Emily, trained by scarcity to conserve words, left the air unchallenged, yet her posture refused retreat. Maxwell departed with everything he arrived, with authority intact, compassion deferred, fear disguised as pragmatism. Somewhere inside him, however, an old grief stirred, one that had learned to walk only in boardrooms and never toward a piano.
Retaliation rarely announces itself boldly. It arrives as inconvenience sharpened into lesson. A napkin flicked underfoot. A task doubled without notice. A schedule shifted to deny rest. Marcus performed indifference loudly, yet watched for flinches that never came. Cheryl circulated invented versions of events where kindness endangered children, where expertise excused indifference, where a maid threatened order merely by believing. Emily's reply remained stubbornly ordinary: complete the work, avoid spectacle, protect the child's fragile curiosity. The house preferred tidy hierarchies to messy progress. Each small humiliation asked a question: will you break where the world expects you to? Each answer arrived as a completed chore and a steady gaze. Upstairs, tiny muscles rehearsed rebellion. Downstairs, an economy of pettiness tried to purchase another exit. The balance was changing, not through grand gestures, but through an accumulation of unpurchased refusals. Denise Rowe organized reality into charts that never allowed for miracles. Her training had value, her outcomes had invoices, and her authority had investors far from this lake. When Clara's foot trembled under Emily's playful provocations, Denise felt the ground threatened to betray her. Systems built on managing limitation do not reward surprises. The margins in those systems widen when hope is delayed and narrow when independence arrives. She redoubled enforcement, tighter schedules, stricter access, more forms, sharper warnings. Professional concern masked territorial panic. In her mind, boundaries protected safety. In practice, boundaries protected Denise. She filed memos polished into weapons, each paragraph a petition for control. The estate absorbed them easily. Wealth understands paperwork better than wonder. Emily's patience met a bureaucracy trained to outlast it. Between them stood a girl with a new spark in her ankle, catching light.
The estate believed surveillance kept truth tidy. Cameras watched to prevent mess, not to honor miracles. Yet pixels can't read policy memos, they only record. Sarah Lynn, quiet and careful, managed linens, keyed codes, and carried a heart allergic to cruelty. She noticed a sequence on the feed. Emily balancing a ball, Clara's foot rising, a brief cascade of muscle memory arguing with history. She saved the clip, hands shaking at the audacity of keeping evidence against a machine that owned the walls. No speeches, no conspiracies, just a file copied because a child deserved protection from people confusing authority with care. Truth does not shout in houses like these. It accumulates until it outweighs permission. Sarah tucked the drive into a pocket where courage felt like contraband. Outside, lake water practiced stillness, while inside, a secret prepared itself for daylight. Institutions erase the inconvenient through procedure. Denise submitted polished concern. Mr. Grayson carried a printed outcome sealed by signature. The paper declared termination the way storms declare inevitability, without apology, confident in precedent. Emily read quietly, a lifetime of precarious employment compressing into one familiar sting. Keep tonight, leave tomorrow. That was the compromise systems offer when mercy costs nothing. She inventoried necessities, folded what folded, and placed the rest where hands could find them quickly. In corridors that measured worth by discretion, she remained visible by necessity alone. Upstairs, a child learned there are departures that do not announce themselves with suitcases. Downstairs, Cheryl rehearsed the post-mortem, Marcus arranged his silence, and the cameras blinked in different red. Emily pressed the paper flat, slid it into her bag, and turned once more toward the work the house kept misnaming.
Children measure truth in bodies, not memos. Clara's crayon slipped when absence arrived early, and the page, once bright with imagined movement, blurred under tears that had waited too long for permission. The room held therapeutic equipment, framed progress charts, and a silence heavy with adult decisions that forgot the child inside their outcomes. Denise offered structure that sounded like comfort and felt like surrender. The lake outside pretended calm, while waves thudded softly against stones, repeating a lesson the house avoided: surfaces lie. Clara had learned to be brave in stillness. Now she learned to grieve without words. Somewhere down the hall, footsteps counted out the last tasks of a day that would not repeat. Grief, small as shoulders shaking, large as a future narrowed, filled the space where hope had begun rehearsing its first lines. Emily understood departures the way some understand music, by breath, by timing, by what to leave unsaid. She returned to the child's side with a clock running and no audience promised. They opened a book about dancers whose feet solved gravity with practice, not magic. Pages turned, and with them, a rhythm settled that therapy codes never catch. A promise formed that belonged to neither employer nor contract. Tonight would be given fully, tomorrow surrendered if demanded. The mansion exhaled, confident it had enforced order, unaware that love performs its best work inside borrowed hours. Downstairs, schedules stacked for morning. Upstairs, a girl anchored herself to a story large enough to carry fear. Emily traced the line between play and progress and decided not to ask permission from a house that confused kindness with liability.
Night arranged the living room into a stage, chandelier lights softening the edges of expensive regret. Emily's fingers found a melody the house remembered but rarely allowed itself to feel, the song Clara's mother once favored when rooms were gentler and futures wider. Music does what memos cannot. It persuades muscle and memory to speak to each other. Clara lifted herself, a body uncertain but newly curious. Knees wobbled, ankles negotiated, breath argued with history. She moved because the music reminded her that movement had belonged to her once, even if only as a story someone told. The piano accepted every tremor as tempo. Emily's posture offered presence without rescue, readiness without theft. Steps stitched themselves together across polished floorboards that had previously only reflected grief. For a moment, the mansion stopped pretending control and watched wonder negotiate its own terms. Strength, newly invited, sometimes overreaches. Clara's steps unraveled into a fall that ended not in failure, but in arms prepared to cushion effort without claiming it. The room recalibrated around a child's honest limit. Denise entered with urgency trained by risk and sharpened by fear. Systems prefer stasis to uncertainty. They call it safety, and sometimes it is. Maxwell stood at the stairs landing, witnessing his house choose sides without speaking. Authority measured liability, love measured breath. Clara chose where to rest. She leaned into the person who had offered courage without contract. In that arrangement, the mansion's architecture, balustrades, crown moldings, the echo of wealth, receded behind a quieter structure: trust. The fall ended the way beginnings often do, messy, tender, unmistakably alive. What followed would belong to cameras, committees, and consequences. This moment belonged only to a child learning her own edge.
Truth, once captured, seeks daylight. Sarah stepped from the hallway's penumbra carrying a small device that weighed more than any chandelier: evidence. The clip, raw and undeniable, showed a child moving toward possibility and a worker facilitating without vanity. Rumor lost oxygen. Policy lost certainty. In estates like this, revelation often travels through gossip. Tonight, it traveled through pixels aligned into proof. Staff saw their reflections in the screen, some ashamed, some calculating, some quietly relieved. The hierarchy hiccuped, unsure whether to praise courage or punish disobedience. Sarah's hands did not shake now. She had chosen a side defined not by rank, but by responsibility. The file leapt from phone to group chat to wider circulation, uninterested in permission slips. Outside, Blackwater held the moon steady. Inside, a new gravity formed around the fact no spin could swallow. Maxwell Harrington had learned to speak in outcomes and delegate emotions to private rooms. Tonight, language deserted him. At the edge of the staircase, he absorbed a daughter's attempt, a worker's devotion, and his own absence braided together. Tears do not negotiate, they announce. He held still, not from indifference, but because movement might break whatever fragile bridge had formed across years of distance. For a man who measured power and decisions, the most powerful act became restraint. The house waited for instruction and received none. That silence was not approval or accusation, it was surrendered to truth arriving uninvited. In that hush, the mansion heard itself. A machine for appearances, stalled by authenticity. Maxwell remained where he was, a figure at the boundary between control and care, watching a child claim inches that cost less than equipment and more than money.
Morning carried headlines through polished doors. Local outlets framed the video as hope. Comment sections litigated motives with ferocity money never tames. Denise's credentials, once unassailable, attracted questions that multiplied into files, phone calls, and findings. The estate preferred discreet transitions, the news preferred spectacle. Termination landed on Denise with the weight of policies enforced unevenly for years. Elsewhere, sponsors distanced themselves from anyone who mocked what now appeared sacred. The house's mirror cracked. It discovered how quickly reputations travel when truth hitches a ride. Emily spent the morning with the child, stretching what needed stretching, resting what needed rest, ignoring the weather outside because bodies do not heal at the speed of news cycles. The clip continued looping online. Each replay drafted its own indictment, not against medicine, but against the arrogance that forgets who medicine is for. Cheryl scrolled and found herself reflected in a timeline that no longer rewarded clever cruelty. Screenshots surfaced, old barbs dressed as jokes, endorsements evaporating like steam. Influence purchased by proximity proved counterfeit when weighed against a child's courage. In the corridors, greetings shortened, laughter dimmed, and the economy of mockery collapsed under truth's new exchange rate. Mr. Grayson adjusted assignments with the briskness of a man salvaging order from smoke. Marcus discovered quiet suited him better than derision, especially when breakfast carried toward the garden room where effort replaced performance. The staff had always known who scrubbed, who suffered, who softened moods without tips. Now that knowledge learned a new rule: respect costs nothing and saves everything. People who had practiced looking away found their eyes drawn toward progress. Culture moved, reluctantly but unmistakably, like heavy furniture finally pushed into sunlight.
The room that once conducted ridicule softened into workable hush. Steam curled upward without commentary. Knives met boards with purposeful cadence. Marcus, who had used volume to protect insecurity, discovered apology in action rather than words. He plated meals with attention bordering on care, sending them to a child whose effort had revised everyone's roles. Emily entered for water, accepted it without ceremony, and left the way dignity prefers, unannounced. The staff's eyes followed not with pity, but with a nascent understanding that labor can be excellence whether or not wealth observes. Kitchens remember who feeds whom. Today, nourishment traveled in both directions, food outward, humility inward. Outside the window, the lake wore wind like a new mood. Inside, heat made room for humanity. Silence, once a weapon, returned to its better use, space for people to become different. Edward Ned Harrow arrived carrying the slower gravity of those who have already outlived their usefulness to wealth and therefore speak more freely. He brought a story the house had misplaced, a young gymnast from a charity exhibition, sponsored by a woman who believed grace could rewrite futures. That woman had been Maxwell's wife, and the girl, Emily. The narrative adjusted itself around names long stored in drawers lined with scented paper. Philanthropy, framed on hallways, looked different when its beneficiaries re-entered as workers rather than photo opportunities. Maxwell listened because time finally insisted. Ned's voice conveyed no triumph, only stewardship. He handed back what grief had hidden, a connection between a child who needed courage and a worker who carried it daily. The estate, built to celebrate generosity, confronted the inconvenient truth that generosity is meaningless unless it recognizes people twice.
Reckonings do not arrive with trumpets. They walk in wearing familiar shoes. Maxwell stood before the lake that had reflected his certainties for years. Numbers assembled in his mind, endowments, investments, acquisitions, seeking to drown a sound he could no longer ignore. Piano keys, echoing steps that should have happened sooner. He considered the clinics attached to his name, the ones opening ribbon doors far from neighborhoods that raised Emily. He traced a line from policies signed in comfort to consequences born in silence. Wealth, he realized, had purchased efficiency and sold empathy at a discount. The world he managed rewarded speed. The child he loved required presence. In that arithmetic, he finally located deficit. Only one payment could balance it: cost, public and personal. He turned from the window, not lighter, but aligned. Decisions awaited that would bruise his standing and heal something larger. Emily entered the office where employment once vanished and found a different document waiting. The paper offered a role that matched the work she was already doing without permission. Coach, advocate, architect of a child's return to herself. She read slowly, preferring comprehension to gratitude. The terms honored skill rather than proximity, competence rather than compliance. She signed with hands that had folded linens and lifted lives, then met the man across the desk not as supplicant, but as partner in a mission larger than them both. Titles changed less than responsibilities. What shifted was legitimacy. The house, which had tried to curate outcomes without paying their makers, now named a maker and paid accordingly. Somewhere down the hall, a wheelchair waited not as a sentence, but as a tool among others. The lake kept still, pretending it had expected this all along.
Mr. Grayson addressed the household with the clipped clarity of someone who values instructions followed and trouble minimized. Yet the content belonged to a different era. Retaliation would end, sabotage would be punished, and progress, however small, would take precedence over pride. The announcement acknowledged what whispers had previously ruled. Cheryl understood the weather had changed. Marcus recognized the chance to be useful without performance. Sarah exhaled carefully, as if relief might trigger alarms. Policies became shelter rather than weapon. The mansion, so skilled at appearances, tested integrity under fluorescent bulbs and morning breath. People adjusted routes, tones, and expectations. It was not a revolution. Revolutions usually avoid payroll. It was better, a reweighted system where a child's effort calibrated schedules, not egos. In that recalibration, labor gained dignity that didn't require invisibility to function. Doors did not swing open, they simply unlocked. News traveled in the language of commitments. A pediatric mobility center endowed in the late Mrs. Harrington's name, open access, publicly audited, governed with seats reserved for families and workers. Not a wing in a hospital brochure, but a building near bus lines and paycheck schedules. Emily would design programming that treated play as medicine and community as infrastructure. Shareholders grumbled, lawyers sighed, and philanthropy relearned the difference between branding and repair. Maxwell accepted the cost as tuition paid to a future where his daughter's stride would not be exceptional but expected. The announcement did not absolve, it aligned. Staff read the release and recognized that, for once, a statement translated into architecture. Clara listened to adults speak of centers and boards and only understood that more children would have rooms where effort replaced pity. That understanding was enough to justify every signature.
On opening day, the center smelled of fresh paint, rubber mats, and possibility. Cameras assembled like eager jurors, but Emily arranged the space for a single verdict: movement. Clara stood on a portable mat, weight settling through ankles that had studied faith. The steps came measured, deliberate, each one a negotiation between fear and muscle remembered. Flashbulbs punctuated effort. Applause tried to claim ownership and failed. Emily remained a steady horizon within arm's reach, offering presence that did not steal credit. The walk ended not with collapse, but with controlled stillness, a small empire reclaimed. Reporters sought metaphors. The child sought water and a moment to laugh without consequence. In the back row, staff from the mansion watched humility look beautiful. The center found its purpose in the simplest ritual. A child steps, the world adjusts. Evenings returned to the estate with less ceremony and more meaning. By the window, puzzle pieces formed pictures that once felt unreachable. And outside, the lake finally reflected something worth keeping, a house learning to deserve its view. Emily and Clara worked through routines that prized patience over spectacle, progress over praise. Staff moved differently, not out of fear but understanding. Wealth did not evaporate. It evolved under pressure from a 7-year-old's will and a worker's steady hands. The security cameras still blinked, but their footage now caught something better than scandal: a culture practicing respect when no one was performing. On the water, gold light folded into evening. Inside, a final image settled into place. 2 figures at a window, one taller, one braver, both changed. The story did not end with steps. It ended with a house deciding who it wanted to be.